Hi, this is Len Furman, the Sports Time Traveler, and today I have a very short episode for you. It's titled 1964 Anybody Can Be on the Mets for One Night, and a preview of where the Sports Time Traveler will be going next. St. Petersburg, Florida, March 13th, 1964. The Sports Time Traveler has finally left Miami Beach and has crossed Alligator Alley and headed north to St. Pete, where the New York Mets have opened their training camp here in 1964. The Mets just might be the worst franchise in baseball history. Since playing their first ever game in April 1962, they have a record of 91 wins and 231 losses. They finished in last place, 60 games out of first place in their inaugural year, and last place again, and 48 games out of first place this past season in 1963. This has led some dreamers to believe that they might be able to help the team on the field, even if they've never played in a professional baseball league. And a few of them have actually come to the Mets training camp uninvited in anticipation that they could possibly make the team. Yesterday, in the Mets training camp headquarters at the Colonial Inn here in St. Pete, the New York Times Leonard Koppett struck up a conversation with Mets manager Casey Stengel and Mets traveling secretary Lou Niss. "They keep coming down for tryouts," said Niss, referring to the steady stream of people under the false impression that the Mets training camp is an open tryout. "The ones I feel bad about are the ones who have families and spend their own money," said Stengel, in a curiously logical moment for the old professor who has become famous for his quixotic quotes over the past couple of seasons as the Mets skipper. At that point, Niss brought up the example of Gypsy Burton. Stengel jumped in and said, "You mean that 27-year-old fellow with two kids who came around at the beginning of the spring?" "That's the one," affirmed the traveling secretary, Niss. Niss then added, "He had some bats shipped down too. When they arrived at the clubhouse, nobody knew whose bats they were." Then Niss told a story about Gypsy Burton. If it hadn't come from the mouth of the man who makes all the Mets hotel arrangements, you would have never believed it. "He showed up here about 4 in the morning, and the room clerk didn't want to wake me up. He just figured it was another Met coming in and put him into Sammy Drake's room at 4 in the morning. Drake is a utility infielder who played 3 seasons with the Cubs and the Mets from 1960 to 62 and is in the Mets training camp trying to earn his spot on the big league team." The story surprised Stengel, who asked, "What did Drake say?" Niss replied, "Sammy wasn't too surprised. It seems he had met him before." Apparently, Gypsy got a chance to be on the field with the Mets at spring training the next day, as Stengel recalled Gypsy telling him he had last played ball in Alaska. But Niss corrected Stengel, saying it was Canada, allegedly on a barnstorming tour. Niss explained, "He played with Satchel Paige's team all over Canada, and he said he hit about 480 or 500, but he admitted the weather was cold and the pitchers couldn't get into shape until about August or September." Of course, Gypsy Burton didn't make the team and was told to go back home to New York. But that wasn't the last of it, Niss continued. "The funniest part was when Gypsy got back to New York. He called me down here and said if there was one more last chance, he'd come back down. I told him all he needed was 15 cents to call Whit Matthews of the Chicago Cubs." While the notion of Gypsy Burton becoming a member of the New York Mets was dismissed by the Mets brass, this conversation about him in the lobby of the Colonial Inn in St. Pete was too good for Leonard Koppett to dismiss for the New York Times. Today, March 13th, 1964, Koppett wrote an article about Gypsy Burton's tryout with the New York Mets. And so at least one wandering gypsy got their 15 seconds of fame. Where is the Sports Time Traveler going next? I'm hanging out in St. Pete in 1964 a little while longer here at Mets spring training, but then I have a busy travel schedule coming up. Here's the stories I will be following for you in the coming weeks. 1924, Walter Johnson starts his 18th and possibly final baseball season. 1954, Roger Bannister attempts to break 4 minutes for the mile. 1964, NBA playoffs featuring Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. Also in 1964, the opening of Shea Stadium in New York. And one more story I'm following in 1964, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, and Gary Player at the Masters. 1974, UCLA and NC State in the Final Four. Also in 1974, Dr. J and the New York Nets in the '88 playoffs. And one more story I'm acutely interested in. 1974, Hank Aaron begins the baseball season 1 home run behind Babe Ruth on the all-time career list. I will only post stories when there is something so exciting, so compelling, I just have to share it with you. Thanks for listening, and please share the Sports Time Traveler.